you. You might hear me. Thank you for coming. This is an incredibly fun and interesting panel of people. The international man of mystery at the end is Nick Lake. The man next to him, who is never wrong but always never wrong but never right either, is Tony McGowan. The one giving us all the props is Meg Rossum in the middle. And the nicest man in publishing, Matt Hay. This will be a panel of 3 halves. First half will most likely be where we don't talk about why children should just be reading children or YA. Then when we do debate it, and then we'll ask you lots of guys to ask us questions, I hope. Nick.
Wait, can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Normally you say, can everybody hear? But can anybody hear? Like all you guys way back there, can anybody hear? Yeah, good, woo! Probably Stan Lee can hear too, yeah.
Do you think Stan Lee can hear?
Stan Lee, can you hear?
Basically, I just produced this entire thing, just so I could meet him. Nick.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Crossover YA readership.
Yeah.
Is it just a marketing ploy that... Okay, explain what it is. No pressure,
Okay.
as in the publisher.
Okay, I should explain I write books, but I'm also an editor of HarperCollins, which is probably why David is asking me that question. What is crossover YA? I don't know is the first answer. I don't think anyone really knows. But within the not knowing, I think I think we draw a distinction in publishing between sort of contiguous crossover, which is your YA books, which naturally cross over the border into adult readers because they are older books with older protagonists. And I think there's a distinct kind of crossover which we're probably not talking about at YALC, which is basically children's books that adults read. So your Harry Potters, your Philip Pullmans. So broadly we make that distinction, but beyond that, who knows? I mean, I wrote a book called In Darkness. It was published as an adult book and a YA book. People kept saying to me, who did you write it for? I said, I don't know, me. I have no idea who it's for. We publish books as YA books, which, generally speaking, which have teen protagonists. I guess if Catcher in the Rye was published now, it would probably be published as a YA book. So I think it's a genre which has ended up subsuming books that would otherwise have been published as adult books.
I guess that's probably the interesting question, the most interesting place to start from is
Into the microphone.
the most interesting place to start from would be, do any of you actually write with a young adult audience in mind, or do you just write the book that you're going to write, and if it's for a teen audience, that's what happens? I'm looking at you, Nick.
Oh, stop looking at me. Yes, that's exactly what I do. I just write a book and then somebody else sells it, basically.
I've got my own, it's alright. It's my go.
Yeah, go.
Well, I've certainly written books that were designed to try and make 16-year-old boys laugh. So I have that in mind. I generally write comedy. Comedy is about to get a reaction from someone. So you are always attending to your potential audience. So I think probably, unlike my colleagues here, I do think about that sweaty, anxious, nervous 16-year-old version of me, and I try and make him laugh, or her laugh.
Can I just say one thing? That sweaty, anxious 16-year-old version of Tony is actually Tony. Just to clarify.
The sweat is there. I have to think about it because I've got a publisher for children's books and a publisher for adult books, so I'm consciously thinking which publisher that's for, and I try and alternate. But it doesn't change the way I write the book. It's just that I suppose the only difference is if I'm writing a book that's YA, and I've just written a book that's YA, the difference is that I feel slightly freer in terms that I can go anywhere in terms of science fiction or fantasy or the future and stuff like that. I feel like the teenage readership is more open to those things. But it doesn't change the style or any of those things.
Nick, anything to add to those?
Sorry?
Anything to add to those lovely things?
I don't think so, no. I mean, I just to echo what the others have said, I just write the books I want to write, and then other people decide who they should be published by and who should read them.
There is I think there's a really interesting question about this idea that YA is partly determined by teen protagonists. Because there are lots of adults writing really grim, miserable adult books with teen protagonists that just don't somehow qualify as YA. And then if somebody like me does what I've just done, which is to write a book with a 22, 23-year-old protagonist, which feels exactly like all my other books, except that it's got the C word in it. I don't want to say that word in front of like 10,000 people. No. Stanley, whatever you're... and then, suddenly then that looks like an adult book. But to me, it looks like exactly the same book I've been writing all along.
I do think there's and maybe more as an editor than as an author, there's possibly a subtle distinction, but it is very subtle, and it's not necessarily real, but I think it might be. If you sort of imagine youth as a tunnel, I think you can maybe see YA books as being inside the tunnel looking out. Whereas an adult book which has a teen character might be more likely, it's not a hard and fast rule, to be looking back from the sort of back into the tunnel.
All I heard was Tony
Not
saying
like
passage. God. And it just went to...
I'm sorry, I didn't actually do that. I was thinking earlier on the way here, I could try and describe my own books. And I went to the school visit last week, and one of the kids there said, your books, they're hard, but they're mucky. And that did seem to kind of sum up my approach. Mucky. So
They're mucky.
And my temptation is always to try and turn every tunnel into a passage. Sorry.
Yeah, and we know exactly what sort of passage as well. But then, you talk about the tunnel, and then there's something like Kevin Brooks' Bunker Diary, which wins the Carnegie Prize, which is in a tunnel looking into a blank wall. So, and kids really love that book. So, how do you describe it? I think it's really, really difficult.
Extremely.
I think it's one of those things like sexual attraction. You know it when you feel it.
Like Tony's passage.
Much like Tony's passage.
Feel my passage every time.
I told you this was going to go horribly wrong.
I wonder how much this is to do with a sort of youthful, questioning perspective on the world. You did an interesting list on Twitter about why people should read YA, and I think one of the things you said was that YA deals with big ideas about death and life and love and sexuality, and as I was lying in bed last night, one of the things I was wondering was whether something like Nausea, the Sartre book, or L'Étranger, would those books be published as YA? They're relatively young characters, and they're about sort of youthful, rebellious philosophy and looking at the world in a different way. So it's maybe partly to do with not just the age of the characters, but a certain kind of freshness of intellectual perspective, and actually thinking and questioning things rather than seeing things as being set in stone, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I think teenagers are, philosophers. You're constantly wrapped up in your own sort of mind in a way that in adulthood you can't always be. But teenagers, you're sort of still in education, you're thinking about stuff, you're changing, your mind and body is changing so fast. The difference between a 9-year-old and a 15-year-old is so much greater than the difference between a 31-year-old and a 36-year-old. So everything's sort of fast and questioning, and that's part of growing up. So yeah, YA is the place to explore those themes, I suppose.
But then there's that amazing statistic that 55% of YA novels are bought by adults. And I don't, I was writing that in a piece I was writing the other day, and I was wondering, they just say adults, and I was wondering, what is an adult? Is that 20 and over, or 21 and over, or 25, 18, 19? 18, nobody, there must be a number somewhere. But, okay, so more than half of YA books are being bought, and presumably, you don't usually buy books for your 16-year-old, they usually order them on your credit card from, wherever they get them. So that's 55% of our readers are grown-ups. So what does that mean?
My kind of great fear about this whole crossover thing is that the teenage books that the adults are reading are the crap ones. So it's a kind of dodgy fantasy Twilighty, Hunger Games type of book. And the books that adults should be reading, the YA books are the more serious ones by, for example, my colleagues here and Mal Peet. So, you know, I just fear that the crossover. What?
My colleagues here, I'm just Matt. No one else, just Matt.
Only this panel.
You know, I also think that all the descriptions that Matt gave of great YA, that questioning, you know, looking into sexuality and anxiety and depression, I'm sure you're all great that does that. It's not just the YA thing.
No, but I think if you look at before the definition of YA, the great books that were written by teenagers were very often just the great books, because great writing speaks to different people, different ages, all that. So a lot of Dickens is technically YA in terms of its coming of age, you know, Oliver Twist and even Jane Austen.
Well, not even Jane Austen. I mean, Pride and Prejudice. I can't ever quite remember whether Elizabeth Bennet says how old she is, but she's either 19 or 20. And she's in danger of becoming an old maid. Jane Eyre, I think, is 18. My favourite, Henry IV, or actually Henry V, Prince Hal in Shakespeare, and Hamlet, for God's sakes. I mean, if there isn't a bigger teenager in the world, and yet, you know, all across the world, everybody's going to watch Hamlet on stage, to be or not to be. You know, I mean, he's like the ultimate dithering teenager. You know.
I found in the pub last night with Matt that we've actually both written books based on Henry IV Part 1. It's weird, coming together all things. How did that come?
This is pure Comic Con now, isn't it? Henry IV Part 1.
Is there something kind of, this is a bit of a tangent, but I wonder whether there's something, sort of cultural shift which is happening as well, that books have been slow to catch up with, which is that in the sort of 50s and 60s you have the notion of teenagers and a teenage culture, and increasingly now, and if you look around this hall, there's more of a youth culture which spans sort of 16 to 34. You can easily see a 32-year-old wearing the same trainers, listening to the same music as a 16-year-old. And I wonder whether the young adult phenomenon is just books being a bit slow to catch up with that.
I think there's another thing, which is that, I mean, I don't know if anybody in the room, in the whole place, has read something like Marilyn Robinson's Housekeeping, which, you know, won the Pulitzer Prize. And it's a fantastic book, but it's bloody slow. You know, you really need, you know, like a week, and with nothing else to do, no family, no children, no dogs, no job, nothing, just to really concentrate on that book. Whereas most young adult books are, you know, there's a real kind of sense of urgency. You know, you want to get people in, you want to get them in quick, you want to get to the philosophy, you want to get to the sex, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, what's not to like? As my Jewish mother would say. Boy.
So let's expand on something I said earlier on about the books that do cross over, what I think are the worst, the kind of fantasy escapism type things. You know, I do slightly despair. I was talking to well, I mean, clearly, there are times when we all feel like escaping. We all need some kind of relaxation. But whenever you read a book that makes you happy in that kind of way, and all you're doing, you're padding your chains. You know, what books should do is make you unhappy, make you discontented, make you angry, make you want to change your lives and change the world. And as soon as you dress up in a costume, you're escaping from that real world. You should engage more with reality, I think.
This coming from the man who said
What? Excuse me, I'll have a little chat with him. Here, Matt.
We're just going to turn the microphones off for a moment. Oh, we all beat up Tony. This
I'm
comes
told to play bad cop, okay, on the panel. Just following orders here.
We'll usher him out the back, don't worry.
That does come from the man who said, I set out to write books to make kids laugh. I'm just pointing.
It's a bitter laughter though, it's a laughter of despair.
I guess I disagree with Anthony in that I think I take the controversial view within publishing that Twilight, for example, is an extremely good book, and I leave aside the queasy morality of its kind of subtext of you have to get married before having sex and all that kind of stuff, which is creepy, undeniably. But as a book and as a first-person narrative which disappears from the page and immerses you in a story and in a character, it's extremely well done, I think. And I think books like that get a lot of criticism sometimes because they're written by women, maybe. The Hunger Games is another extremely good book that is brilliantly written. So I don't think there's anything wrong with adults reading The Hunger Games or reading Twilight. There are other books, I admit, that are not so good. But if you want to read The Hunger Games or Twilight, go for it.
But you could just stop right there and say, I mean, one of the questions that they asked us for the questionnaire, what do we think of people who say adults shouldn't read YA books? I mean, I gave like the shortest answer in the world, which is read the bloody books you want to read. I mean, the idea that you should kind of legislate, by some kind of category, what sort of book you should read. If you love kind of vampire sex books, read vampire sex books. I mean, yes, no.
I would legislate. I'd make you read the good books. You can imagine, okay, when you're 80 or 90 or 110 years old on your deathbed, and you've read Twilight 19 times, but you haven't read War and Peace, then that's a happy life.
And then what's it going to say on your grave? It's going to say, I read War and Peace. Aren't I clever? I mean, nobody really gets there. Kind of what you've read doesn't usually get listed on your headstone.
Clever and sweet.
But it makes you a better person. If you read The Brothers Karamazov, you'll be a better person. If you read Twilight for the 19th time, you'll be a slightly worse person.
It's not what you read though, is it? It's how you read it. I mean, a vampire book isn't just about vampires, is it? It's about absolutely everything. I've written a vampire book, and
it's a satire on vampire books, isn't it?
it's a satire on middle class life via the medium of vampires.
As you do.
I think the danger of talking about things like War and Peace is that it kind of fosters the idea that something has to be long and complex and difficult in order to be intellectually satisfying and stimulating and interesting, and there are plenty of books. Meg mentioned Marilyn Robinson, who's one of my favourite authors, who wrote an unbelievable book called Home, which is maybe 200 pages long, one of the most beautiful books I've ever read in my life. There's a writer called Ishmael Tadare who writes books like The Three Arch Bridge, which are kind of rich with symbolic resonance and are talking about propaganda and history and nationalism, and they do it in 100 pages of incredibly limpid, clear, accessible prose. And I think it's a desperate fallacy to think that a book has to be complex and difficult to be worthwhile. In fact, there are books, I won't name them because I don't make enemies if I don't have to, but there are books that are highly critically acclaimed and very clever, for want of a better word, and intellectual that I've read and thought were deeply sophomoric and pretentious and weren't actually saying anything very profound at all.
But the thing is, we would never be having the conversation of, like, we'd say, okay, now all you people, anybody who has a boyfriend or a girlfriend who's like not really that intellectual, I think when you leave here, just ditch them, because we should all have really intellectual, partners. I mean, if anybody has ever been on a package holiday, no, I'm afraid you're just an inferior person. So, I mean, the idea that there is a kind of answer to how you should read, or who you should marry, or what you should wear, it's ridiculous. I mean, the fantastic thing about YA is that because there's been a bit of publicity about it, there's a bit of money in it. A lot of people have been taking it really, really seriously. So you don't just get the very odd book with a teen protagonist. There's tons of stuff around, and there's lots and lots to choose from, which is great. And you can read that, or you can read Wolf Hall, which is also great.
Yeah, and also I think the dangerous thing about YA is just having anything that looks like it might be a genre. I mean, YA isn't a genre. If anything, it's an age range, but it's not even that. I mean, I don't really know what YA is, but it's just books. I think as a writer, it doesn't help to have any of that in your head at all. I think good things happen when you mix things up. I think you can write about aliens and Tolstoy together in the same book. It doesn't matter. Good things happen when you blur boundaries, and if you're too rigidly literary, commercial, it just becomes a sort of snobby game.
And actually, I mean, Matt's book, The Radleys, is a perfect example of that, because I always said I don't understand vampires. I don't get why everybody likes vampires. You know, well, I kind of maybe do, but not really. And then I read the Roundheads, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. And it is the weirdest book, but it's a vampire book, but not as we know it.
Sorry,
Just no.
It's not controversial. I mean, I write YA because I like to set stories in high school. Because for me, that's where stuff happens with an incredible intensity. That's when you fall in love for the first time, and that's when your body's changing. Every single day in secondary school is full of intense love, intense hatred, conflict. There's people there who hate you, want to do you harm, whether they're in the kind of adult world. So that's why I focus on YA. It's just I can't understand why any books are written set anywhere else apart from high school in some ways.
Just on Matt's point about genre, I think one of the interesting and great things about YA is that for some reason readers of YA, whether they're teenagers or adults, seem to be more willing to read across genres. And there are genres within YA, there's dystopian, there's paranormal, there's realism, whatever that means. But there will be readers who will read across those, whereas I think adults often, by adults I mean older adults, often get calcified into just reading crime, just reading shit that... I was talking to a colleague of mine who works in publishing, so should know better, who was reading The Shining for her book club, and she said, oh, I normally only read literary fiction, and I thought I would hate this, but you can actually write really well, can't you? And I was like, yeah, no shit. He's Stephen King, he's amazing. And I think, you know, YA readers seem to be a bit more open-minded about genre, which is a good thing.
But I think YA is leading the way. I think it's changing. I mean, Stephen King never had a review in The Guardian. Not like he needed a review in The Guardian, but now people like Neil Gaiman, Stephen King, big genre writers who are good at writing, but they can say they're not just on the subjects they're writing.
Remember me? I did it earlier and it echoed. I know I'm scared. So is it the front guard of creative fiction at the minute? Is the most exciting place to be writing teen fiction? I'm just thinking, basically on what you said, Matt, on that you feel you can play and be more creative and experimental in the younger stuff that you write over the adult stuff.
Yeah, it just doesn't sell as well. My version of it doesn't sell as well. But no, I enjoy I have the most fun, I suppose, when if I'm thinking of a reader at all, if I'm thinking of myself as a sort of 15, 16-year-old, at that age, for me, there was no YA, so I was reading, I suppose my YA was Stephen King and stuff like that, so...
my YA was Stephen King and
Dickens, so... And I think it, also going back to the last point, reality at that age feels so unreal at that point, so... And, you know, if you look at quantum physics, if you look at science now, reality itself is very, very hard to write about, I find, in a very straight way. It just unravels, because everything's so subjective. If you're a religious person, reality is different to an atheist person. So I don't think realism can exist in the same way it did in the 19th century when we had a solid view of what reality was. So I think everything is fantasy.
People slightly pussyfooting around a basic unpleasant fact, though. And that is that there are things you cannot say in YA or children's books in general. There are restrictions about your language.
Say what you can't say.
But I'm told that you're allowed three of the F words per book.
I was told you didn't have any.
Okay. One of my favourite books I read as a teenager is a book called Portnoy's Complaint by Philip Roth. Fantastic book. There are about 5 chapters devoted to the joys of masturbation. Now, you just could not do that in a YA book now. It simply wouldn't get published. So there are areas where you can't go.
I'm not sure that's true, actually. I think you probably could.
It's really good.
In the same
I think actually publishers are waiting for that book, the book about liver and masturbation.
I
think you should write it. I think if anybody's going to write it, Tony, it's going to be you.
It's got the requested 10.
I can't say that I've ever deleted a swear word from a YA, but I know that specifically in the US, Scholastic Book Club is a very powerful force, and they sell into a lot of areas of the Bible Bells, and they like to take swear words out. But in terms of YA, I've made Derek Landy take swear words out of his 10+ books, because why would I not? but not YA. And I don't see why a YA book doesn't deal with masturbation. I think a YA book can deal with anything. You know, kids have mental illnesses, they lose people, they're abused, they're hurt. You know, why should there not be books that address these things?
You know, the
If
interesting
it's
thing.
within the context of the story, then
Basically, if Tony says something, we're all just going to
We're all gonna
disagree.
say-
Yeah. He's doing a really good job, isn't he? But my book, How I Live Now, was made into a film, and it was given a 15 rating in the UK and an 18 rating in the US because there's a scene where the director had somebody shout the C word, and yet again, I'm not going to scream it out in this one. It was completely unnecessary. It wasn't in the book. You hardly heard it in the film, and it got us an 18 rating in the US and lost us almost our entire audience because of that. And I felt curious about that, but I felt that was a director who didn't really understand that the power of the emotion and the power of the scene completely didn't require someone to shout, I just whispered that,
Stanley.
across
Stanley.
across a crowded room. And so, you know, I mean, David's original question, is YA at the vanguard? I think there is some truth in that. I mean, you know, I wrote a book about God turning out to be a 19-year-old boy, and everybody thought I was going to get shot when I went on tour in America. But actually, I had a whole tour in the South, and I was on all these radio stations that were real. You know, they all started out saying, "Hi, my name is Melody, you know, God-fearing so-and-so, and God bless you, man. Welcome to our program today, God Speaks."
And we have Melody here.
Yeah, I thought we did. She's right here. But actually, they were amazingly interested in talking about the book. You know, and they kept talking about another one where God turns out to be a guy living in a shed, or a woman, and Wendy was a woman living in a shed. So, yeah, I mean, I think that those great big kind of weird ideas often do kind of come out of YA.
And those restrictions, Tony, do they not kind of help push your creativity?
Well, yeah, I suppose there's an argument to say that the rules do help you. You know, the best poetry is in some way structured by rhythm and rhyme. But I think that it depends on where you set those boundaries. There's always boundaries into literary fiction about what you can and can't do. And it just seems to me that there are important things you can't say in a YA or a children's book. I wrote a book called Henry Tumor, which there's one page where the teenage boy finds out he's got a brain tumour, and he uses quite strong language. And I've been to schools where the librarians just can't have that book in our library, the parents will object. So whether or not the editors like it, there is a real world barrier there, that there are gatekeepers. So the book I wrote after that, called The Knife That Killed Me, the film of which comes out on the 15th of July, quick plug, Stan Lee. Yes, in that I deliberately structured it so the teenage boy telling his story can't use bad language. It is in a particular situation where you can't use bad words, and we're getting around that problem.
Yeah, I've had that problem in America, but not here. I was literally told by an American editor, you will halve your readership because it won't get into schools and libraries in the Midwest. You'll only have the coasts. And so I did. I was very weak. I changed the chapter of my book for America to make it less overtly anti-religious.
Whereas I used one instance of the F word in How I Live Now, and there was no trouble at all in this country. But in America, my editor put a little smiley face in the margin and wrote "time to go" with a little circle around the F word. So I phoned her up and I said, "Well, why does it have to go? Is it because librarians won't have it in schools? Because if that's the reason, I'll take it out." And she said, "No, it's not really that. But we have to ask ourselves how we feel about the integrity of the English language." And I said, "Oh yeah, well, leave it in then."
We have 10 minutes if there are any questions. But what I'm not telling you about the questions, you have to come up here to ask it. Oh, okay, you're still willing. Let me bring it. Not that I was trying to discourage questions.
Should we say if anybody else has a question, just kind of maybe come on up.
kind of about...
Eat the microphone.
How, although there is crossover into adult books, there is still a taboo about it. In the John Green books, for example, they'll read it and they'll love them and they'll end up on the adult shelves, and that's fine. But then fantasy novels, etc., that adults are reading, they're kind of reading it and going, it's not good, it's a fantasy novel, we can't take this seriously. And it brings me back to like year 13, where I had a teacher who defined good literature that we could really talk about in English, as contemporary novels that had sad endings or had some interesting kind of issue in them, and that those were the only ones that really mattered.
I think there are some really bad fantasy novels out there. But B, I'm not entirely sure that that's true. I mean, taking the Hunger Games as an example, I'm an adult. Lots of the people I know are adults. They're still perfectly okay, but they're definitely adults. And they openly admit to thinking it's a fantastic book and loved it. You know, I know agents who loved it. I know authors who loved it. I know critics who loved it. I don't think there's a...
You do have a point, though. I mean, if you go to a party and somebody says, "Oh, and what do?" And you say, "I write books." And then you hope that they'll go, "Oh, wow, that's fantastic. I really admire you so like mad, and I wish I could be you." But they never stop there. They always go, "And what sort of books do you write?" And then you have to go, "Well, I kind of write children's books, but they're not really for children. They really deal with very difficult themes, and they're like really sophisticated, a lot of adults." And you hear yourself doing that, but it doesn't matter because they've already walked away. So there is kind of a prejudice, I think, that, and I actually had a woman say to me once, "If all else fails, I'll write a children's book."
I think you're going to the wrong party.
But also, within adult books, there's so many snobberies about airport fiction, commercial chick lit, erotica, whatever. There's only really one type of adult book that is legitimate and that, contemporary, realistic, literary fiction is the only thing that seems sort of...
And that's right. That's good, isn't it?
Yes.
So I think people should be ashamed of reading the Hunger Games on the tube. You may as well sit there and read the very hungry caterpillar. Get the very hungry caterpillar, put your finger in the little hole.
Just unplug it before they kill him.
Or if not the Hunger Games, at least 50 Shades of Grey. Should we go to the next question?
Yep. Thank you.
I was really interested in what you said, Jake, about trying to define what...
Talk into the microphone, nobody can hear you. You have to talk, like this.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So I was really interested in what you were saying about trying to define the difference between young adult fiction and fiction for adults that is really, has teenage characters in it. And to me it seems that the difference...
What's your question?
All right, Meg, I'm getting there. You talked about the passage, they're looking forward and they're looking backwards, but it seems to me, I just want all of you and all the people on the other panel, you're talking about writing to their own 15-year-old selves, which is kind of a nostalgic outlook. It's all going back. I don't see that there's...
What's your question, Helga?
I wanted to see what you had to say about it. It's a discussion point.
But I think specifically what you're doing in that case is you're not necessarily looking back on yourself as a 15-year-old and writing with the perspective of an adult. You're putting yourself in the head of yourself as a 15-year-old and looking out. I mean, I don't know that this is necessarily a rigid distinction. It's a distinction we use in publishing that I've talked to other editors about when we're looking at something. Is the perspective adult or is the perspective from the perspective of the young person? And I think you can kind of tell the difference. There's a book called Room, which is narrated by a child, but it's very clearly with a sort of overarching adult perspective and awareness. So I think we're probably all writing for our 15-year-old selves, but as our 15-year-old selves.
Or we're writing as adults who are still so in touch with our 15-year-old selves. And actually, I always make a distinction between somebody like John Green, who I believe is still a teenager, and I think that's why he communicates so fabulously and so directly with other teenagers. Whereas somebody like me has spent 30 years thinking about being a teenager because I couldn't figure it out at the time. And so I'm writing, as somebody who's really connected to that time, but as somebody who spent years and years and years trying to figure out why it was so difficult.
I also think, in a way, when I said that about being 15, I sort of meant, I felt like I was my most intense version of me. Like, if I was writing to myself now, it's sort of diluted, tired, weary version of my pure, essential,
Balding, overweight.
So I do have a question then. Kevin Brooks just won the Carnegie novel, the Carnegie Award, and I was just wondering what you think about this novel and its significance in this particular discussion about the crossover. Yeah, where is the borderline, the young adult? Is this a watershed moment?
I haven't read it, so I will bow out and not comment on that.
It wasn't dark enough. It chickened out, I thought. Right, romantic comedy. He's a coward. I say it now. He's a coward.
Calling it Kevin Brooks.
I had a stalker for 7 years. This little boy who I loved to pieces, who killed himself last year. And one of the last things he said to me was, "I really hope Bunker Diary doesn't win the Carnegie. I think it's a terrible, terrible book." So I think if you really are dark, that book could have really. I'm not saying that Kevin is responsible for his death. No, I'm not. I promise. But no, I was too dark for me. But who knows?
Next question. Next question. Somebody move this on.
How do you feel that constantly evolving gender roles and the more liberal view of young people has led to the evolution of young adult fiction?
Yes. Can somebody repeat that?
Could you repeat it? Sorry.
How do you feel like changing gender roles and the fact that the younger generation has a more liberal view towards gender roles has led to the evolution of young adult fiction?
Oh, yeah, really good question. No, I mean, that's a fantastic question, and I think because, in my generation, you were gay or you were straight. There was nothing in between, and nobody talked about transgender. In fact, I wrote a book called What I Was about somebody who's basically transgender, but I didn't even know I was writing about someone who was transgender. And I went to the London Gay Men's book group, and they told me the book wasn't gay enough, which was really annoying. So, I mean, I think there's so much change coming from young people about gender roles, and I think you're absolutely right, and I've never thought about that. I think it's really filtering up into adult fiction. That's a fantastic question.
Really hard to be controversial about this one, so I think we're all just going to totally agree. Unless I in fact say that women should be at home doing the cooking and the knitting, while men go out and slay antelope.
Sometimes there's just no need.
The truth is that every single YA author I've met has been at the extreme liberal end of the political spectrum. We're all going to entirely agree with it. We're all signed up for that one. Sorry.
Great question.
Yeah, it really was. And on that note, I get to thank my 5 guests. Mr. Stan Lee for making a guest appearance. Thank you, sir, wherever you are. Nick Blake and his passage.
Stan Lee! No, I didn't say who's Stan Lee. You were thanking Stan Lee, I thought. No. Okay, go ahead, just talk to me.
That just happened.
I know who's Stan Lee.
That coming. To Tony McGann, Meg Rossum, and Matt Hay. All 4 of them will be signing books for the next 3 days over here. And thank you all again for listening to us pass along.
Thank you. And thank you to David for hosting us so brilliantly.
Yeah.